Fraud comes in a lot of forms, and perhaps one of the most legendary fraudsters of all time would be a man named Michael Marion Emil Anacletus Pierre Savundra Nyamgam, or, as he's usually called, Emil Savundra. Thank goodness. The man wound up making a career out of scamming people, though the one that propelled him to notoriety involved insurance fraud. Well, not insurance fraud in the way you're probably thinking about it. Usually when people say insurance fraud, it means someone is trying to scam the insurance company by submitting a false claim. But in this case, it was the other way around. The insurance company was ripping people off and wound up not being able to pay out anything, while Savundra lived it up. But it didn't start out that way. People aren't born scammers, they just become that. And it's impossible to discuss the collapse of the fire, auto, and marine insurance company without discussing the history of Savundra himself, since really it was pretty much all him. Savundra was actually born to a family of lawyers in Ceylon, which is present-day Sri Lanka, while they were still under British rule. His early life wasn't super notable, though he did serve briefly with the Ceylon Engineers, and did attempt to serve during World War II in the Royal Air Force, as he had a pilot's license, but he was actually denied, interestingly enough. He would eventually get married, and his wife would actually remain loyal to him over his entire life, which, as you'll find out, would test the patience of just about anybody. Ceylon actually obtained independence in 1948, and when that happened, Savundra was 24. He started working in business, though at the same time he also developed insulin-dependent diabetes, type 1. And as a lot of you are probably aware, that's not really a curable condition. It can only be treated. However, this diagnosis didn't stop him. When the Korean War broke out, he suddenly found himself involved in what could be considered fraud, though at the time, it wasn't necessarily self-serving fraud. Savundra was used as a local intermediary, and he was involved in economic sabotage. Now, what does that mean? Well, instead of dropping bombs, you basically steal money from the enemy. That's pretty much what that means. And in his case, he was attempting to sell oil to China. A shipload of oil, to be precise. And Savundra probably learned about this time that he was a pretty smooth talker. He was a very convincing man. However, this whole time, Savundra was actually working with the United States. And this oil he was selling to China didn't actually exist. The boat didn't exist either. Nothing about it existed. He would simply get the money from China for the oil, deliver it to his American contacts, who likely cut him in for a certain amount, and China would be out money and not have any oil. He did this at least twice, by the way. Humorous as that may be, he did really like the scam, and would start using it to line his own pockets. In 1954, at the age of 31, he was actually convicted for the first time in his life. He was found guilty of conning the credit bank of Antwerp, Belgium, tricking them into paying him for a shipment of rice. The shipment of rice, as doubtless you were expecting, didn't actually exist. He just took the money and ran. But he was caught and was imprisoned for a few years, but he would again appear in 1958, this time acting as a representative of an American company known as Camp Bird, looking into mineral interests in Ghana. In this instance, he was not selling any fake shipments. This time he was heavily involved in bribery at the highest level of government, though he would actually defend his activities in his own diary. He claimed that this was actually very normal in Ghana at the time. Pretty much every business was doing it. The government was hideously corrupt, so he was just going with the flow. Eventually he would be caught, and he was deported, though he never stood trial for any of that. Just the following year, in 1959, he once again sold a fake shipment to the Costa Rican government, this time of coffee beans. The coffee beans didn't exist. But these are all small time, just ripping off the occasional third world government. And Belgium, that's not third world, but whatever. We want to get into the nitty-gritty, the insurance. What did he do? How did he get away with it? Well, he didn't really get away with it in the technical sense. He was eventually tried and convicted, but the scam this time involved an insurance company, as I said, Fire, Auto, and Marine. Savundra had actually moved to the United Kingdom in the early 1960s, and in 1963 he would form the Fire, Auto, and Marine Insurance Company, generally referred to as FAM, which is what I'm going to call it because I think it's funny. Auto insurance was a really hot market in the 1960s. The automotive industry itself was booming, so it was totally reasonable to start up a legitimate company. He really could have gone legit and probably been fine, but Savundra doesn't know how to be legit. He only knows how to scam. And the way he attracted customers to the new insurance company was offering ridiculously low rates. Just insanely low rates. Just absurdly low rates. To the point that pretty much every other insurance company just couldn't compete because, frankly, mathematically, it didn't seem possible. The way insurance typically works is, well, it's almost like a subscription service, I would say. You pay a monthly rate, sometimes yearly, it depends on the insurance, but it's generally monthly. And by paying that rate, you are promised a certain type of protection for whatever it is, whether it be health insurance or car insurance or what have you. In this case, it was car. In the event of, say, a car accident, the insurance will pay you whatever the damages are. And in this arrangement, generally the insurance company is making more money because ideally you're not getting in a car accident. The insurance exists as a fallback measure in case something bad happens. That's the way the industry is supposed to work. And in many places, it's actually illegal to not have car insurance because of how important it can be. But in order for a company to stay afloat in this manner and actually generate some level of profit, they have to charge a fair rate, one that the motorist is willing to pay, but high enough that it will eventually cover the cost of having to pay out if something bad were to happen. But FAM's rates were really agonizingly low, and they even invested in a really revolutionary computer system, something almost unheard of at the time. They collaborated with IBM to do it. While all this was going on, Savundra began to make a lot of money, like a very suspicious amount of money. He lived a very lavish lifestyle and rubbed shoulders with many of the elite members of British society in those days. He was in fact friends with the infamous osteopath Stephen Ward, who was a central figure in the 1963 Profumo affair, which was a major political scandal. That scandal in itself probably needs its own video, but it involved John Profumo, who was the 46-year-old Secretary of State for War in Harold Macmillan's Conservative government, having an extramarital affair with a 19-year-old model, Christine Keeler, which had started in 1961. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal. A politician cheating on his wife? Yeah, I mean, we've seen that before. No, the Profumo affair was crazy. It went well beyond just an extramarital affair. But like I said, it needs its own video, and Savundra wasn't really a major part of that, though he was involved with two of the central figures of the scandal, Christine Keeler herself, as well as Mandy Rice Davies. And at Stephen Ward's trial, they actually referred to Savundra as the Indian Doctor, despite the fact that he was not a doctor at all, or Indian for that matter. But yeah, let's just move on. The reason why it's important to this story is that the scandal kind of overshadowed pretty much everything else for a while, and as a result, when FAM started suddenly running into problems and mysteriously not being able to pay their customers, it kind of fell by the wayside. I mean, it was talked about, but it wasn't the big news. So while Savundra was busy powerboat racing, no one was really worried about the fact that his company didn't seem to be paying anyone to, what they were supposed to be paid, or anything. And he tried to silence detractors as well. He was actually one of the first in the UK to use libel law in an attempt to prevent publications from talking about him. But what was really going on here? Why wasn't FAM able to pay out? Well, simply put, not only were they just flat out not taking in enough to be able to pay anyone's claims effectively, also the money just wasn't actually there at all. Savundra had taken it in the guise of a private loan that was listed as a 20-year loan, and just spent it on whatever he wanted. This was hidden somewhat, as he underwrote FAM with securities that were said to be worth £540,000 and £870,000 in shares, but those securities didn't actually exist. So, yeah? And many of his reserves in stock were also forgeries, and he was reported to transfer a significant amount of the assets to a bank over in Liechtenstein. Those funds weren't there. Yeah, so this was good. Really everything was gone, and it all kind of came to a head, not in court. I mean, he would have his day in court, but first he had his day on TV. Oh yes! You've been seeing the footage of him this whole time, and this comes from the Frost program, a show hosted by one David Frost on the Red Diffusion London network. Savundra had some gall to even show up for the interview, but he did, and engaged in a debate with David Frost. This occurred in 1967, just so we're clear. Frost didn't hold back and questioned Savundra heavily regarding how the money had been taken, where it ended up, and whether or not he actually, felt bad about ripping a whole bunch of people off. And Savundra didn't. No, seriously, he had no remorse. His apathy was through the roof. The man did not care, and you can tell why he got away with this, because he is a pretty smooth talker, but Frost does not let him, as he puts it, smokescreen the situation.
Published.
You'll have to do better than that in the book.
Oh no, the book is going to be a lot better. This is one that I just had to think of something to remind me of them. But anyway, they mentioned they published a photostat. They published a photograph of the loans on the day mentioned in those agreements. Most emphatically and most certainly, I had borrowed the amount stated there, 300,000 pounds, from Merchants and Finance Trust. There was absolutely no doubt about that.
And it was on a 20-year loan?
And it was on a 20-year loan.
And you still have it?
Ah, that is the point.
At one point, Savundra even refers to the audience as peasants.
And wasn't even intelligent. I'm not going to cross swords with the peasants. I came here to cross swords with England's greatest swordsman.
I'm afraid nobody is a peasant. I'm afraid they're the people who gave you your money.
Ah, this is fine.
Which is really funny, since a whole bunch of people in the audience that day were in fact his own customers that had not been issued their payouts on their claims. Really. The whole thing was a disaster for Savundra. He wasn't able to talk his way around Frost, and it actually cemented Frost's career in general, but management of the station was really concerned that they might be in some trouble here, as the interview was quickly dubbed a trial by television, and they felt they may have unintentionally violated Savundra's right to a fair trial, because pretty much everyone felt he was guilty now. He basically told them what he did, flat out. He did not care. He said he had no moral responsibility because he had signed away his rights to the company before FAM went under. Never mind the fact he took the money and ran before that, but he had signed the company away, so, it's not a problem anymore now. Eventually, though, he was arrested, shortly after the interview, in fact, and in March of 1968, he would be sentenced to 8 years imprisonment with a £50,000 fine or an additional 2 years imprisonment. True to his form, however, he managed to get out of a normal prison sentence because they wound up having to transfer him to the prison hospital, as his health was starting to fail him. At this point, he actually became addicted to drugs, opiates due to chronic pain, and he would be released after serving his time just before Christmas in 1974. He died in Old Windsor, Berkshire, on December 21st, 1976, at the age of 53. And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders: Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Road Videos, Lord Off 444, Royal Hudson 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Caleb Rainwaters, Prez Drenton, Master of None, Travis Dolinsky, Jared Brussel, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitson 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Terrevel, Hayden DeGrow, Metal for Life Guy, No, Eric Hutton, Kurt Forkham, Ohio Trucker 1, Mitchell Cole, Mr. Sleepy, Dr. Racer 78, AET Museum, Railroad Preserver 2000, Williard Conklin, Windy City Rails, Liam Wright, DM Tribal Typhoon, Harry, Hannah Bird, Western Colorado History, Ryan Wehofer, Drew Debris, George Kenny, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness and a Bidgewater Fun! Farewell.